Imagine standing beneath the vast, star-filled sky of ancient Mesopotamia, where the whispers of forgotten gods still linger in the dust of ruined temples. This was a land where divinity walked among mortals, where every storm, every harvest, every breath was shaped by the will of deities whose names have faded into obscurity. While figures like Marduk and Ishtar dominate our understanding of Mesopotamian mythology, there's an entire pantheon of powerful beings who once commanded reverence only to vanish into the shadows of history. Today, we're peeling back the layers of time to uncover 30 of these lost gods and goddesses, each with stories as captivating as they are mysterious. Mesopotamia wasn't just the cradle of civilization, it was a melting pot of faith, where every city, every dynasty worshipped its own divine protectors. Yet as empires rose and fell, so too did the fortunes of these gods. Some were absorbed into larger myths, their identities blurred beyond recognition. Others were simply erased, their temples crumbling into oblivion, but their legacies linger, hidden in fragmented texts, half-buried artifacts, and the echoes of rituals performed millennia ago. What secrets do these deities hold? What forgotten powers did they wield? And why did they fade from memory while others endured? This journey isn't just about listing names, it's about resurrecting a world where the divine was as real as the rivers that nourished the land. Together, we'll explore deities who controlled the winds, shaped destinies, and even challenged the order of the cosmos. From the vengeful to the benevolent, the enigmatic to the terrifying, these figures reveal a spirituality far richer and more complex than most history books dare to suggest. So let's step into the shadows of ziggurats and decipher the whispers of clay tablets, because the gods of Mesopotamia are waiting to be remembered, and their stories are more astonishing than you've ever imagined. Ashur stands as a towering figure in the pantheon of forgotten Mesopotamian deities, a god whose name once struck fear and reverence into the hearts of an empire. While Babylon's Marduk often steals the spotlight in modern retellings, Ashur was the beating heart of Assyrian identity, a divine embodiment of their military might and imperial ambition. Unlike other gods tied to nature or fertility, Ashur's domain was conquest itself, his very essence intertwined with the rise and fall of Assyria's brutal dominance. Originating in the ancient city of Ashur, this god began as a local protector before ascending to national supremacy. As Assyria expanded, so did Ashur's influence, absorbing traits of older gods like Enlil to become a symbol of absolute authority. Kings didn't just worship him, they claimed to rule by his direct command, launching campaigns in his name and inscribing his emblem, a winged disc, on their battle standards. To the Assyrians, victory in war was proof of Ashur's favor and defeat unthinkable. Yet Ashur's mythology holds eerie gaps. Unlike Ishtar or he lacks a rich tapestry of personal myths. Was he seen as too distant, too focused on statecraft to bother with tales of love or trickery? Or did his worshippers guard his secrets too closely, leaving few traces for later generations? What we do know paints a stark portrait, a god who demanded unwavering loyalty, whose temples doubled as armories, and whose decline mirrored Assyria's catastrophic collapse. When Nineveh fell in 612 BCE, Ashur's altars went cold, his name slowly erased by time until now. Now let's turn our attention to a deity who embodied both the fertile earth and the power of the written word Nisaba, the goddess who watched over fields of golden grain and the delicate strokes of cuneiform tablets. Unlike the war-driven Ashur, Nisaba's influence flowed from two seemingly disparate realms: agriculture, the lifeblood of Mesopotamian society, and the scribble arts, the foundation of its administration. Her dual nature speaks volumes about how early civilizations saw knowledge and sustenance as deeply intertwined. Temples dedicated to Nisaba once rose from the city of Eresh, where scribes and farmers alike sought her favor. She was often depicted holding a stylus in one hand and an ear of grain in the other, a striking visual metaphor for the connection between survival and literacy. In a land where crop yields determined prosperity and written records governed trade, law, and myth, her worship wasn't just spiritual, it was practical. Farmers prayed for her blessing on their harvests, while scholars invoked her before pressing wedge-shaped symbols into wet clay. But Nisaba's gradual eclipse by Nammu, the god of writing and wisdom, reveals a fascinating shift in Mesopotamian values. As empires grew more complex, the focus moved from the rhythms of the field to the demands of the palace. Nammu, associated with royal scribes and political power, lacked Nisaba's agrarian ties, reflecting a society increasingly centered on bureaucracy rather than the soil. Yet traces of her legacy endure. Some texts describe Nammu as her student, a quiet acknowledgement that even in obsolescence, the goddess of grain and ink shaped the very tools of civilization. Deep in the shadowy borderlands between life and death lurked Ninazu, a deity whose very essence embodied paradox. Unlike the straightforward destruction associated with Nergal, the more famous ruler of the Mesopotamian underworld, Ninazu wielded a double-edged power, bringer of disease and bestower of healing, lord of serpents and master of renewal. His cult thrived in the forgotten city of Enegi, where whispers of his name sent chills through those who understood his true nature. Ninazu's symbols tell a story of duality. His serpent-entwined staff, carved into temple walls and clutched in priestly hands, represented the thin line between venom and antidote. In a land where snake bites could mean agonizing death, his followers believed he controlled the creatures themselves, capable of unleashing their lethal bite or halting its effects with a flick of divine will. Rituals in his honor weren't for the faint of heart. Ancient texts describe ceremonies where live snakes coiled around altars, their movements interpreted as omens. Some accounts even hint at priests drinking diluted venom as a test of faith, trusting Ninazu to spare them if their devotion proved true. What truly sets Ninazu apart is his fleeting connection to the living world. While most underworld gods demanded distance from the realm of breath and sunlight, Ninazu's healing aspect drew desperate petitioners. The sick would sleep in his temples, hoping for dreams where the god revealed cures, a practice echoing Greek Asclepios millennia later. Yet this compassion had limits. Cuneiform tablets warn that Ninazu's gifts came with a price: healed today, claimed tomorrow. His mythology suggests that those he saved from illness eventually served him in the afterlife, their debt repaid in eternal service. The confusion between Ninazu and Nergal reveals much about how Mesopotamia viewed the afterlife. Where Nergal ruled the dead with unquestioned authority, Ninazu lingered in the in-between, a liminal figure who understood that life and death weren't opposites but part of an endless cycle. When his cult faded, absorbed into Nergal's growing dominance, something vital was lost: the recognition that decay and recovery, poison and medicine, are two sides of the same divine coin. Among the towering figures of Mesopotamian warfare gods, Shara cuts an unexpectedly modest silhouette, a pint-sized brawler whose legend proves that divine power isn't measured in stature. While Ninurta, the thunderous champion of Lagash, dominated the Pantheon's martial law, Shara carved out his own niche as the scrappy patron of Umma, a city locked in perpetual rivalry with its neighbors. Imagine a deity not clad in radiant armor, but perhaps standing on a stool to meet his fellow gods. Gaze a divine underdog whose myths crackle with humor and hard-won respect. Shara's worship centered in Umma, where he symbolized the city's defiant spirit against larger adversaries. Unlike the region-spanning fame of Ishtar or Nergal, his influence was intensely local, his altar flames reflecting the anxieties of a smaller state forever at the edge of conflict. Farmers turned, soldiers would offer barley cakes shaped like shields before battle, invoking Shara's cunning rather than brute strength. His very depiction small, often shown gripping an oversized mace, hints at how Amma saw itself, outmatched in size but never in grit. One myth captures Shara's essence perfectly. At a divine gathering, the other gods openly jeer at his appearance, with Ninurta quipping that the battlefield is no place for a god who could hide behind his own spear. But when chaos erupts and a monstrous foe threatens them all, it's Shara who darts between legs, lands precise blows on vulnerable spots, and ultimately saves the day. The tale doesn't just explain his cult's persistence, it's a biting commentary on how Mesopotamia's city-states viewed themselves. Smaller kingdoms like Amma clung to this narrative, seeing their survival against empires as proof that cleverness trumps sheer might. Shara's eventual fade into obscurity mirrors Amma's own decline, yet his legacy lingers in an unexpected place: early wrestling traditions. Texts describe ritual combat in his name, where fighters grappled not with raw power, but with technique and agility, echoes of a god who turned perceived weakness into a weapon. In a pantheon obsessed with cosmic battles, Shara remains a refreshing reminder that sometimes the fiercest warriors come in the smallest packages. Lahar's story begins not with thunder or divine decree, but with a problem even gods couldn't ignore: hunger. In the earliest days of Sumer, when the Pantheon labored to establish order, they realized something startling. Celestial beings might command the cosmos, but they still needed to eat. Thus emerged Lahar, the divine cattle goddess, sculpted from clay by the gods to provide milk, cheese, and meat for their heavenly tables. Yet her creation wasn't just about divine convenience. It mirrored the heartbeat of early Sumerian life, where herds meant survival and cattle were walking wealth. Lahar's rivalry with her sister Ashnan, the grain goddess, crackles with the tension of an ancient societal shift. Cuneiform tablets preserve their legendary debate, a divine spat that's equal parts comedy and cultural commentary. In one version, the sisters sit in the hall of Enlil, each boasting of her gifts. Lahar points to her herds, the creamy richness of milk, the strength of oxen that plow fields, while Ashnan counters with golden sheaves of barley, the bread that fills bellies and the beer that gladdens hearts. Their argument grows so heated that Enlil himself intervenes, declaring Ashnan the victor. But here's the twist: the verdict wasn't just about divine preference. It marked a turning point in human history as agriculture began eclipsing herding as the foundation of civilization. Yet Lahar's decline wasn't immediate or total. In pastoral regions, her influence lingered. Shepherds whispered prayers to her at dawn, rubbing amulets carved like cattle as they led their flocks to graze. Temple records from mention offerings of butter and cream left at her altars well into the 2nd millennium B.C.E. But as cities swelled and fields of grain fed thousands where herds could feed hundreds, Lahar's practicality waned. Unlike gods of war or storms, she couldn't reinvent herself. Her role was too specific, too tied to a fading way of life. The irony: Lahar's legacy hides in plain sight. Those early debates between her and Ashnan reflect a duality that never truly disappeared. Even in an agricultural society, cattle remained vital, not just for food, but for leather, labor, and sacrifice. Perhaps that's why some scholars suggest Lahar didn't vanish so much as merge, her essence absorbed into broader fertility cults. In the quiet moments when a newborn calf takes its first steps or a churn turns milk into butter, echoes of the cattle goddess still linger, a reminder that the old gods never really leave us. They just change shape. Shara slithers through Mesopotamian myth like the creature she embodies, part healer, part enforcer, her sting as potent as her solace. This goddess of love and oaths wielded a power few deities dared claim: the ability to bind hearts together or tear them apart with equal ferocity. At first glance, her association with scorpions seems paradoxical. How could a creature symbolizing venom also represent protection? Yet in Ishara's realm, tenderness and terror were two sides of the same clay tablet. Her worship centered on contracts as much as passion. Merchants swore business deals in her name, lovers exchanged vows beneath her gaze, and kings sealed treaties with her scorpion emblem stamped into the wax. Break an oath sworn to Ishtar, and the consequences weren't merely spiritual, they were visceral. Texts describe curse tablets invoking her wrath, promising feverish agony, like the scorpion's sting for oath breakers. But her venom had antidotes. Those who honored their word received her medicinal blessings. Healers used clay scorpion amulets to ward off actual stings, blurring the line between metaphor and medicine. The sacred marriage rites of Ishtar reveal her most fascinating contradiction. During annual festivals, priestesses would reenact her union with the storm god Teshub in ceremonies that blended eroticism with solemnity. Unlike Ishtar's more public rituals, Ishtar's unions emphasized privacy union as both intimacy and contract. Scrolls from Mari describe participating couples drinking from a shared cup inscribed with scorpions, their whispered promises believed to echo in the divine realm. Yet Ishtar's gradual absorption into Ishtar's cult wasn't merely theological streamlining, it reflected changing attitudes toward feminine power. Where Ishtar demanded accountability through her balanced duality, Ishtar's later worship emphasized extremes, either ecstatic love or unfettered destruction. The scorpion's nuanced symbolism faded, replaced by lions and weaponry. By the time Hammurabi's laws were etched in stone, Ishtar's name appeared mostly in archaic curse formulas, a relic of when love and justice shared the same sacred sting. Perhaps her most enduring legacy lies in those clay amulets. Found in households from Ur to Ugarit, these tiny scorpions weren't just protective charms. They whispered of a time when divinity wasn't about singular virtues, but the delicate balance between creation and consequence. In a world quick to separate mercy from judgment, Ishtar reminds us that some bonds must carry both honey and venom to hold. Ninkasi scuttles through Mesopotamian mythology like the creatures she governed, both feared and necessary, a deity whose very existence highlighted civilization's fragile dance with nature. While gods of storms and harvests commanded grand temples, Ninkasi's altars were humble affairs. Clay bowls of grain left in field shrines, tiny figurines buried at the edges of villages. Her domain, rats, mice, and all the nibbling, burrowing pests that could decimate a harvest or spare it depending on her whims, farmers knew better than to ignore her. A single season of her disfavor meant granaries emptied not by drought but by teeth. What makes Ninkasi so fascinating is her duality. She wasn't just a destroyer, she was a protector invoked to control the very creatures she represented. Prayers etched on clay tablets revealed desperate bargains. Ninkasi, sharp-toothed lady, turn your children away from my barley, and I'll heap your shrine with sweetest emmer. Some texts even describe rituals where farmers released captured rodents at her shrines, a symbolic returning of her children to divine care. This wasn't simple pest control, it was negotiation with a capricious force of nature, acknowledging that the line between vermin and sacred creature lay in perspective. Her rural worship contrasted sharply with urban attitudes. As cities like Ur and Babylon swelled, their towering walls and packed streets saw rodents not as divine agents but as filthy nuisances. Ninkasi's cult dwindled, her role reduced to a footnote in incantations against disease. Yet in the countryside her presence lingered. A farmer's almanac from Nippur advises planting times based on when Ninkasi's brood retreats to the reed beds, suggesting her rhythms still dictated agricultural life long after her name faded from official hymns. The final irony, Ninkasi's disappearance mirrors the ecological disconnect of urbanization. City dwellers forgot that rats weren't just invaders, they were part of a balance older than ziggurates. When archaeologists uncovered a mouse skeleton wrapped in linen beside a tiny clay wheel, perhaps a votive offering in a ruined field house, they found not just a relic of forgotten worship, but a testament to how deeply Mesopotamia once understood that even the smallest creatures carried divine weight. Ninsun emerges from the mists of Sumerian legend as a figure of extraordinary wisdom, a goddess who understood the language of dreams long before Freud or Jung put pen to parchment. Known affectionately as the wild cow of the enclosure, she embodied both the nurturing gentleness of a mother and the untamed insight of the divine. Unlike the tempestuous love goddesses or fearsome underworld queens, Ninsun's power lay in quiet perception, her ability to decipher the cryptic messages the gods sent through sleep. Her temples in Yurok weren't centers of ecstatic ritual, but sanctuaries where rulers and commoners alike sought meaning in their midnight visions. The Epic of Gilgamesh gives us Ninsun's most vivid portrayal, not just as a passive mother figure, but as an active participant in her son's destiny. When Gilgamesh dreams of falling stars and meteorites, it's Ninsun who translates these omens, revealing his coming bond with Enkidu. Her interpretation isn't mere prediction, it's strategic counsel. She instructs Gilgamesh to treat the wild man Enkidu as a brother, setting the entire epic in motion. Later, as Gilgamesh prepares to face Humbaba, Ninsun adopts Enkidu as her own, performing a ritual that binds their fates. These scenes reveal a goddess deeply involved in mortal affairs, wielding influence not through brute force but through knowledge and foresight. Her temple in Yurok, the Agalma, was a place of rare egalitarianism. While most Mesopotamian deities demanded offerings based on social rank, Ninsun's priestesses accepted dream accounts from shepherds and kings alike. Clay tablets found near the site describe a remarkable practice. Visitors would sleep in special chambers, believing Ninsun's presence could clarify their visions. Upon waking, they'd recount their dreams to the priestesses' women trained in an intricate system of symbolic interpretation. Some of these records survive, detailing everything from anxiety over crop failures to premonitions of royal coups. Yet Ninsun's maternal aspect couldn't compete with the rise of Ninlil, Enlil's consort, who came to embody the idealized mother goddess across Mesopotamia. Where Ninsun represented personal, intimate guidance, Ninlil became the cosmic nurturer, a shift reflecting how religion increasingly served state ideology over individual spiritual needs. By the Old Babylonian period, Ninsun's worship had dwindled to a cult of scholars and dreamers, her temple overshadowed by the grandeur of Ishtar's ziggurat. The true tragedy of Ninsun's fading might lie in what was lost, a divine figure who validated introspection and personal revelation. In a world where gods typically demanded obedience, she offered understanding. When a Babylonian scribe centuries later copied Gilgamesh's story, he added a telling detail. As Gilgamesh weeps over Enkidu's death, it's Ninsun's lament he echoes word for word. Even in eclipse, the wild cow goddess left her hoofprints on history's clay. Pabilsag loomed over Larak's skyline like a celestial sentinel, his bow drawn against the darkness, a god who could pierce enemies with arrows or heal their wounds with the same hands. This forgotten guardian embodied contradictions that would baffle modern minds, a warrior whose arrows brought pestilence or cure, a divine hunter fused with the stars themselves. His very name whispered through fragmented texts, Pabilsag, meaning the ancestral chief, hints at a time when he stood taller in the Pantheon, before history reshuffled the divine hierarchy. What set Pabilsag apart was his chilling hybrid form. Unlike the regal lion, eagles, or bull men of Mesopotamian art, his depictions fused a lion's body with a scorpion's tail, crowned by a human archer's torso. This wasn't just artistic flair, it was cosmic symbolism. The lion represented solar power and kingship, the scorpion venom and subterranean secrets, while his drawn bow linked him to the heavens. Astronomers now recognize his influence in the Sagittarius constellation, once called Pabilsag's Arrow by Babylonian stargazers. A clay planisphere from Nineveh even maps his celestial form, arrows pointing toward the heart of the Milky Way, as if guarding the axis of the universe itself. His dual role as destroyer and healer made him indispensable to Larak's people. soldiers carried amulets shaped like his lion-scorpion form, believing his arrows could strike down foes or purify battle wounds. Medical texts cite rituals where priests would mimic Pabilsag's archery stance over the sick, chanting, "As the arrow flies straight, so may fever flee." Yet this balance couldn't survive Mesopotamia's shifting allegiances. As Ninurta, the thunderous god of Lagash, rose to prominence, Pabilsag's traits were absorbed piecemeal. Ninurta took his archery motifs, while healing aspects drifted to Gula, the medicine goddess. By the time of Hammurabi's reign, Pabilsag's name survived mainly in star charts, his temple repurposed for newer gods. The irony: Pabilsag's legacy outlasted memory. Those who glance at Sagittarius today unknowingly trace the outline of a lion-scorpion archer, his arrows forever nocked in the night sky. And in a quiet corner of the Louvre, a terracotta plaque shows him mid-draw, hybrid form coiled to strike, a silent testament to when gods could both kill and cure with the same divine breath. Before the first ziggurat pierced the sky and the earliest gods took form, there was Nammu, the primordial womb of existence itself. Unlike Tiamat, her tumultuous counterpart who personified the chaotic sea, Nammu represented the vast, nurturing waters from which all creation emerged. She wasn't merely a goddess, she was the foundation of reality, the dark, watery abyss that existed before time had a name. Sumerian hymns describe her as the mother who gave birth to heaven and earth, a being so ancient that even An and Kai, the sky and earth deities, were her children. Yet somewhere along the way, her name faded from temple inscriptions, her legacy drowned out by louder, more dramatic myths. The contrast between Nammu and Tiamat reveals a fascinating duality in Mesopotamian thought. Both were watery primeval forces, but where Tiamat embodied the destructive potential of the ocean, a force to be conquered in the Enuma Elish, Nammu symbolized creation without conflict. She required no battle to bring forth life, her waters simply were, teeming with possibilities. Early texts from Eridu, one of Sumer's oldest cities, depict her shaping the first gods from clay like a potter at her wheel. No thunder, no war, just silent, steady creation. This made her indispensable to early theology, yet curiously absent from Babylon's later epics. Her erasure from the Enuma Elish isn't accidental. As Babylon rose to power, its mythmakers reframed creation as a violent struggle, elevating Marduk's slaying of Tiamat as the universe's defining moment. Nammu's gentle Genesis narrative didn't fit this new world order where gods forged kingdoms through strength, not serenity, yet she never fully vanished. In priestly circles, particularly among the Intu priestesses of Nammu's rituals persisted. These women performed secretive rites with sacred water vessels, invoking her name during eclipses and solstices, moments believed to thin the barrier between chaos and order. One surviving incantation tablet offers a glimpse into her enduring mystique. It describes Nammu as the one who knows the blueprints of life, suggesting her wisdom encompassed not just birth, but the underlying patterns of existence. Perhaps that's why her influence lingered in shadows. She represented a truth too profound for state-sponsored religion. While Tiamat's corpse became the stuff of epic poetry, Nammu's legacy flowed quietly underground like a subterranean river feeding the roots of forgotten faith. The irony: modern science echoes her more than the Babylonians might have guessed. The primordial soup theory of life's origins mirrors Nammu's generative waters, an uncanny resonance for a goddess whose name was nearly washed away by time. When archaeologists unearthed a broken cylinder seal in Nippur showing a faceless goddess surrounded by spiraling waves, they might have found the closest thing we'll ever get to her portrait, a deity so fundamental she needed no face, only the endless creative dark. Ninkasi slithered between worlds, a deity whose very form whispered of life's cyclical dance, his serpentine coils bridging the gap between the underworld's chill and the earth's fertile warmth. Unlike the stark terror of Nergal's realm, Ninkasi's domain pulsed with paradox. guardian of the dead, yet catalyst of rebirth, a god whose emblem, two serpents entwined around a rod, would echo through millennia as the caduceus of Greek medicine. His myths unravel like the roots of the sacred mess tree he was said to inhabit, delving deep into Dumuzi's resurrection and the fragile balance between decay and renewal. The tale of Dumuzi's return from the underworld hinges on Ningishidda's quiet mediation. When Inanna descends to reclaim her slain lover, it's Ningishidda who negotiates the terms of his partial resurrection, 6 months in the land of the living, 6 in the shadows, a compromise etched into the very seasons. Texts from depict him standing at the threshold of the underworld, his serpent staff barring the way until Inanna agrees to pay the price for Dumuzi's release. This wasn't mere myth-making, it was agricultural allegory. Farmers watching barley seeds die in the soil only to sprout anew saw Ningishidda's handiwork, his serpent symbolizing both the soil's hidden fertility and the inevitability of loss. That serpent staff holds its own fascination. The Greeks later adopted it as Hermes Caduceus, but its origins trace back to Ningishidda's gilded statues in Lagash, where priests carried rods topped with coiled bronze serpents during healing rites. Medical tablets prescribe placing such rods beside the sick to draw out the demon like a serpent shedding its skin. The irony, as Babylon's influence swelled, Marduk's priests systematically erased Ningishidda's connections to healing, relegating him to a minor underworld functionary. His caduceus was repurposed as a mere symbol of commerce, stripped of its deeper resonance. Yet Ningishidda's most subversive legacy might be his gender fluidity. Unlike the hyper-masculine warrior gods, he was often depicted as androgynous, bearded but with delicate features, his robes shimmering like scales. The Gaudiya cylinders describe him as the one who changes form as the serpent changes skin, a deity who defied rigid categories. This fluidity made him a patron of liminal spaces, marketplaces where goods changed hands, riverbanks where land met water, even the moment between sleep and waking. His eventual eclipse by Marduk reflects a broader theological shift from cyclical, nature-bound deities to gods of absolute order. Where Ningishidda embraced life's dualities, Marduk demanded singularity. But in the quiet of rural shrines, Ningishidda's worship persisted. As late as the Seleucid era, harvesters left offerings at tree stumps, whispering to the Lord of the Coiled Ones, a testament to how deeply his vision of death and rebirth had taken root in the Mesopotamian soul. Today, when a doctor places the caduceus on a clinic wall, they unknowingly honor a god who understood that healing requires confronting the darkness, and that sometimes resurrection wears a serpent's skin. Bao padded through Mesopotamian myth with the quiet determination of a healer at dawn, her presence marked not by thunder or fire, but by the soft whine of dogs at her feet. This daughter of Anu carried a legacy far removed from the celestial politics of her father. Her domain was the trembling hand of the feverish child, the soldier's wound weeping under bandages, the whispered prayers of those clinging to life's fraying thread. In the city of Lagash, her temples doubled as clinics, their walls hung with terracotta votives shaped like afflicted body parts, ears, eyes, withered limbs, each one a silent testament to her mercies. What set Bao apart was her canine companions. While other healing deities bore lions or serpents, Bao's sacred dogs, often depicted licking wounds in temple reliefs, reflected a profound observation of nature. Ancient physicians noted how dogs' saliva seemed to clean injuries, turning a biological quirk into divine symbolism. Excavations at her main sanctuary revealed dog burials beneath the floor, their skeletons arranged as if sleeping at her altar. One cuneiform tablet describes a ritual where patients would sleep alongside temple hounds, believing Bao's healing power flowed through their warm breath. The marriage between Bao and Ningersu, Lagash's warlike patron god, might seem paradoxical until you consider the Sumerian worldview. Their union symbolized the inseparable bond between destruction and restoration, the spear and the scalpel. When Ninkasi returned from battle, Bao was said to count his wounds with her gentle hands, a metaphor for civilization's endless cycle of conflict and repair. Hymns celebrated their partnership with startling intimacy. Like the dog who licks her master's blood, so Bao tends to the warrior's scars, turning his rage back to peace. Yet Bao's decline came not from irrelevance but from bureaucratic streamlining. As Mesopotamian medicine standardized under Gula, another healing goddess with broader jurisdiction, Bao's localized cult was absorbed. Gula kept the canine motif but shed Bao's personal touches, like the morning rituals where priestesses brewed medicines while dogs circled the hearth. Patient inscriptions tell the bittersweet tale. Early tablets praise Bao by name, the lady who lifted the darkness from my eyes, while later ones vaguely thank the healing goddess. Perhaps Bao's most enduring legacy lies in those clay votives. Unlike grand statues meant to awe, these small, crudely shaped limbs and organs speak of individual terror and hope. In the British Museum, one such offering bears a child's fingerprint pressed into the clay beside the words, "Bao, do not take my mother." In that fragile artifact, we touch not just a forgotten goddess, but the universal cry against mortality itself. Nanshe stood as Mesopotamia's moral compass, a goddess who measured power not by the weight of gold but by the tears wiped from a widow's cheek. In the marshy city of Nina, her temples doubled as courthouses where the desperate and dispossessed could seek justice beneath her watchful gaze. While other gods demanded blood sacrifices or grand monuments, Nanshe's altars were piled with humble offerings, woven reeds from basket makers, clay ducks molded by orphan children, the whispered confessions of corrupt officials forced to kneel before her priests. Her hymns proclaimed her the one who knows the orphan, who hears the widow's cry, a divine advocate in a world where the vulnerable often vanished like footprints in wet clay. What made Nanshe's worship revolutionary was its fusion of prophecy and pragmatism. Her priests practiced divination not with animal entrails, but by interpreting the flight patterns of sacred ducks in the temple marshes. These birds, believed to carry messages between heaven and earth, would skitter across the water's surface as petitioners recited their grievances. A sudden dive might signal truth in a merchant's claim. A flurry of wings could reveal perjury. Tablets from Nina detail cases where these avian verdicts overturned rulings by local governors, proving Nanshe's authority transcended human hierarchies. One particularly vivid account describes a land dispute where the ducks clustered around a widowed farmer, forcing a wealthy landlord to return her stolen fields, an act of divine social justice etched into legal records. Her annual festival, the Day of the Broken Bread, was a masterclass in radical empathy. During the New Year celebrations, Nina's elite were required to serve meals to the poor, with priests reciting Nanshe's decree. Let the powerful taste the bitterness of hunger that they may remember. The ritual culminated in the burning of debt tablets, a symbolic cleansing of financial burdens that foreshadowed later Babylonian Anjuraram decrees by centuries. But Nanshe's vision went further. Surviving hymns describe her distributing land to landless women, a staggering concept in patriarchal Mesopotamia. One verse boasts, she takes the measuring rod from the greedy hand and gives it to the calloused palm of the weaver. Yet Nanshe's egalitarian ethos couldn't survive Babylon's iron-fisted consolidation. As Hammurabi's centralized bureaucracy replaced local adjudication, her role as a check on power became inconvenient. The same legal reforms that praised justice began erasing her bird oracles from court procedures, dismissing them as the chatter of marshes. By the Kassite period, Nina's temples were repurposed as grain storehouses, her duck motifs repainted as mere decorative flourishes. The tragedy, Nanshe's fingerprints linger in places scholars rarely check. Those Babylonian debt relief edicts lacked her moral core. They were economic tools, not spiritual mandates. And when a Seleucid-era scribe copied an old hymn to Ishtar, he accidentally substituted a line about judging the poor that originally belonged to Nanshe. Even in obscurity, her ideals refused to drown, bobbing to the surface like the sacred ducks she once commanded, whispering that justice, when rooted in compassion, never truly sinks. Hendersoga prowled the twilight realms of Mesopotamian belief, his flickering torch casting eerie shadows across the boundary between waking life and the world of spirits. Known as the Shining One who carries a staff, this lesser-known deity served as both night watchman for the living and guide for the dead, a celestial bouncer deciding who passed into the underworld's gates. While Utu blazed across the sky in his solar chariot, Hendersoga operated in the liminal hours, his lantern swaying like a pendulum between realms. Temple reliefs from the Third dynasty show his distinctive silhouette, a hooded figure gripping a long staff topped with a caged flame, often standing at the foot of Sikhs or beside freshly dug graves. His role as psychopomp escort of souls reveals Mesopotamia's nuanced view of death's journey. Unlike Nergal's violent underworld or Ninazu's healing-focused afterlife, Hendersoga specialized in transition itself. Lamentation texts describe him whispering instructions to the newly deceased, teaching them how to navigate the 7 gates of the underworld without angering their guardians. One haunting tablet from Nippur records a mourner's plea, "O Hendersoga of the dim light, let my son's shadow not stumble in the crooked paths." His torch wasn't just illumination, it was a beacon for disoriented spirits, helping them avoid the fate of wandering eternally as restless ghosts. The absorption of Hendersoga into Utu's solar cult reflects a theological shift toward binary oppositions, day versus night, life versus death. Originally distinct, Hendersoga gradually became Utu's night shift, his lantern reinterpreted as a fragment of the sun's power trapped in a portable vessel. A bilingual text from Sippar illustrates this merging, showing Utu handing Hendersoga a glowing orb with the words, "Carry my eye when I sleep." Yet traces of Hendersoga's independence persisted. In exorcism rituals, priests invoked him specifically for twilight hours when malicious spirits were most active, suggesting his expertise couldn't be fully replaced by a sun god's borrowed radiance. Those rare lamentation texts where Hendersoga appears alone offer tantalizing glimpses of his original character. A fragment from Lhasa describes him not just as a guide, but as a divine notary reciting the deceased's deeds before Ereshkigal's throne, his torchlight revealing hidden truths. Another tablet warns that he might extinguish his lantern for oath-breakers, leaving them to wander blind in the underworld's maze. This judicial aspect hints at a far more complex figure than his eventual reduction to Utu's night watchman suggests. Perhaps Hendersoga's true legacy flickers in modern funeral customs, the candle lit beside corpses, the lanterns hung during festivals for the dead. When a mourner today lights a vigil flame, they unknowingly echo a Mesopotamian belief that even in death's darkness someone or something carries a light to show the way. Ninima's story unfolds in the quiet corners of scribble workshops where the scent of wet clay and reed pens clung to the air, a goddess whose domain wasn't thunder or harvest, but the delicate art of turning language into permanence. Known as Lady of the Reed Pen, she presided over a revolutionary niche, the education of women in cuneiform, a skill that granted access to the highest echelons of Mesopotamian society. While male scribes worshipped Nabu, Ninima became the silent patroness of priestesses, merchants' daughters, and royal consorts who dared to carve their thoughts into tablets. Her epithet wasn't just poetic, it was radical. In a world where literacy equaled power, she guarded the tools that could elevate women beyond traditional roles. The evidence of her influence hides in recipe tablets from Sippar and Nippur, not for potions or spells, but for ink. These meticulously detailed instructions, written by women scribes, describe grinding lapis lazuli into blue pigment or mixing honey with soot to prevent cracking. One tablet, signed by a priestess named Enheduanna, though likely not the famous poet, includes a prayer to Ninima. "May your reed never splinter, your lines stay straight as truth." These weren't mundane technical notes, they were acts of devotion, preserving knowledge in a fragile medium that could shatter if dried too quickly. Nineveh's scribes understood that writing itself was alchemy, transforming whispers into eternity. What makes Nineveh's eventual erasure so poignant is how thoroughly her legacy was overwritten. As scribble schools became institutionalized under male-dominated temples, Nammu absorbed her attributes. By the Old Babylonian period, recipes once attributed to Nineveh were recopied under Nammu's name, her delicate reed pen replaced by his masculine stylus. Even her association with female wisdom was reframed. Later texts reduced her to a vague muse for scribes' wives, her active role in education scrubbed away like a palimpsest. A tablet from Babylon neatly encapsulates this theft, a once celebrated hymn to Nineveh, now altered to praise Nammu, with only the original formatting hints betraying its true authorship. Yet traces of her stubbornly persist. In the British Museum's collection, a tiny clay cylinder bears the impression of a woman's fingernail beside the words, "Nineveh's hand guided mine." It's a whisper from a time when goddesses didn't just inspire literacy, they wielded it. When modern scholars debate whether Enheduanna was history's first named author, they might unknowingly honor Nineveh's most enduring lesson, that words once written can outlast even the gods who taught us to hold the pen. Dumuzid Abzu swam through Sumerian myth like a silver flash in the reeds, a goddess easily mistaken for her famous namesake, yet pulsating with her own distinct magic. While the tragic shepherd Dumuzi captured imaginations with his seasonal descent to the underworld, Dumuzid Abzu remained anchored to the freshwater springs of Kinnunir, her divinity rising from the very silt that nourished the marshlands. Where Dumuzi symbolized cyclical death and rebirth, she embodied the perpetual life of wetlands, the darting fish, the whispering reeds, the secret currents that sustained entire ecosystems. Her temples weren't grand ziggurats but humble shrines woven from River Cane, where fishermen left offerings of nets and priests wore headdresses strung with scales. Her rituals revealed a profound intimacy with water's dual nature. During the spring floods, Kinnunir's people performed the drowning of the lady, submersing her effigy in the deepest part of the marsh. Unlike Dumuzi's mournful descent, this was no tragedy. It was a joyous return, a symbolic reunion with Abzu, the primordial freshwater abyss. Clay tablets describe celebrants wading into the shallows, their arms laden with lilies as priests chanted, "The fish knows its home, the reed knows its roots, Our Lady returns to the source." When the effigy resurfaced days later, carried by the current to a predetermined spot, it signaled nature's fidelity, a promise that the waters would always give back what they took. The confusion between the two Dumuzids arose from more than shared syllables. Early scribes struggling to catalog regional deities often compressed them into singular figures. But excavation of Kinnunir's temple archive revealed stark differences. Dumuzid Abzu's emblem wasn't the shepherd's crook but a cluster of reeds encircling a carp, a motif etched into irrigation sluices and woven into fish traps. Unlike Dumuzi's passionate ties to Inanna, Dumuzid Abzu stood independent, her myths emphasizing self-contained cycles rather than stormy divine relationships. One hymn boasts, "She needs no lover's cry to rise her waters, lift her when the time is right." Yet her absorption into Dumuzi's cult wasn't accidental. As Sumer's city-states centralized, pantheons streamlined, and deities with overlapping domains merged, Dumuzid Abzu's freshwater magic was grafted onto Dumuzi's agricultural narrative, her fish reinterpreted as symbols of fertility rather than a distinct aquatic realm. By the Roman III period, even Kinnunir's priests referred to her as Dumuzi of the Springs, erasing her unique identity. Modern marsh dwellers near Nasiriyah still practice a curious ritual each spring, tossing woven reed figures into the Euphrates, watching them drift like tiny effigies. They call it an old custom, unaware they're whispering the last echoes of a goddess who once ruled the liminal spaces between river and land, between obscurity and remembrance. Sholpi stumbled into Mesopotamian myth with a tankard in one hand and the stars in the other, a deity who blurred the lines between celestial wonder and earthly revelry. Known as the Shining Drunkard, this jovial god presided over two seemingly unrelated domains: Saturn's slow dance across the night sky and the raucous tavern culture of Sumer's street corners. While other gods demanded solemn rites, Sholpi's worshippers celebrated with foaming beer jars and bawdy songs, their temples doubling as alehouses where the sacred and the scandalous intertwined. His link to Saturn, called Sholpi's star in Babylonian astronomy, hints at a deeper cosmic role. Ancient sky watchers noted how Saturn's sluggish orbit mirrored a tipsy stagger, weaving a celestial metaphor for the god's earthly persona. Astrological tablets describe him as the planet that lingers like a drunkard at the crossroads, influencing festivals timed to Saturn's phases. But Sholpi's true heart lay in the taverns of Nippur and Isin, where his cult thrived among brewers and barmaids. Excavations at these sites reveal tavern walls adorned with his constellation symbol alongside crude graffiti. One particularly vivid example reads, "Sholpi blesses those who drink deep and sing louder." The hymns honoring this deity would make a modern bartender blush. One tablet from now displayed in the British Museum, recounts how Sholpi challenged the sea god Enki to a drinking contest, only to vomit the Euphrates into existence, a myth that cheekily explained the river's winding course. Another describes him seducing the goddess Ninlil by spiking her beer with dates, a tale that likely accompanied initiation rites for temple courtesans. These weren't just stories, they were licenses for controlled chaos, allowing societies to celebrate excess within sacred boundaries. Yet Sholpi's downfall came with the rise of temperance ideologies under Babylonian reformist kings. As urban elites sought to civilize religious practice, his tavern temples were rebranded as austere Saturn shrines. The same hymns once belted over beer jugs were rewritten to praise his astral wisdom, stripping away the raucous humor. A telling erasure appears in a Kassite-era tablet where scribes replaced the line, "Sholpi dances on wobbly legs with the heavenly lord strides with measured steps." The irony, Sholpi's spirit survived in secret. Demotic texts from later periods mention star drinking rituals where participants imitated Saturn's motion by staggering in circles, a coded nod to the old ways. And when archaeologists unearthed a tavern ruin in Lhasa, they found a broken jar inscribed with his name, still sticky with 4,000-year-old beer residue. Some gods fade into obscurity, but Sholpi, he left history with a hiccup and a wink. Ninkasi bubbled through Sumerian life like yeast in a vat, a goddess whose frothy domain fueled temples, built pyramids, and even shaped the world's first known paycheck. While her famous hymn survives as history's oldest beer recipe, Ninkasi's true influence fermented in the mundane magic of Mesopotamian survival. Her brewery temples weren't just sacred spaces. They were ancient factories where priestesses doubled as master brewers, churning out liquid wages for laborers and elites alike. In a land where the Tigris and Euphrates carried both life and danger, her beer, thick as porridge, laced with dates and honey, offered hydration safer than river water, nutrition richer than bread, and a buzz that made the heat bearable. Step inside one of her temples at Lagash and you'd find a divine assembly line. Priestesses mashed barley on heated stones, chanting lines from Ninkasi's hymn as they worked. "You are the one who soaks the malt in a jar." The sweet wort stirred with honey and wine. These weren't poetic metaphors, they were precise brewing instructions, each verse corresponding to a step in the process. Archaeologists analyzing residue from temple vessels confirmed the hymn's accuracy, finding traces of dates and fermented grains exactly where the text described. For workers building ziggurats under the blistering sun, their daily ration 2 to 3 liters of this nutrient-rich brew, wasn't a perk, it was caloric fuel doled out in ceramic jars stamped with Ninkasi's emblem, a sheaf of barley crossed with a brewing paddle. The secularization of beer mirrors Mesopotamia's industrialization. As state bakeries and breweries scaled up, Ninkasi's intimate connection to the craft diluted. What once required priestesses invoking her name could now be mass-produced by anonymous laborers. A telling shift appears in administrative tablets from Ur's third dynasty. Early records list beer as Ninkasi's gift, while later accounts simply note barley output. Even her hymn, once a living recipe, became ceremonial, recited during festivals but divorced from actual brewing. Yet Ninkasi's legacy intoxicates modern craft brewers. Experimental archaeologists have recreated her beer using the hymn's instructions, yielding a tangy, unfiltered brew that clings to the tongue like liquid history. When sipped today, it's a reminder that civilization wasn't just built on wheat and water, but on the alchemy of fermentation and a goddess who turned grain into gold. Ninchuba strides out of Ishtar's shadow as Mesopotamian mythology's ultimate fixer, a deity whose androgynous brilliance and razor-sharp wit redefined loyalty itself. Often reduced to a footnote in Ishtar's flashy myths, this celestial vizier was the power behind the throne, the negotiator who could smooth celestial feuds with a whisper or stare down the 7 gates of the underworld without blinking. Unlike the tempestuous love goddess, Ninchuba thrived in the space between extremes, their very fluidity depicted sometimes as a beardless youth, other times as a woman in a royal vizier's robe, reflecting the adaptability that made them indispensable. The descent of Ishtar hinges on Ninchuba's quiet heroics. When Ishtar rashly charges into the underworld, it's Ninchuba who springs into action, first begging Enlil and Nana for help, then racing to when those pleas fall on deaf ears. Their strategy with the god of wisdom is a masterclass in diplomacy. Instead of demanding rescue, they suggest create a loophole, crafting the asexual being a Sushanamir to trick a Reshkigal. This isn't blind loyalty, it's calculated brilliance. A Babylonian tablet from Sippar captures the moment with startling clarity. While Ishtar rots in darkness, Ninchuba's words glisten like oil on water, slippery, shining, impossible to grasp or dismiss. The Hermes parallel cuts deeper than mere messenger tropes. Both deities navigate boundaries, Hermes between Olympus and Earth, Ninchuba between the divine and chthonic realms, but where Hermes relies on trickery, Ninchuba wields protocol like a scalpel. A terracotta plaque from shows them holding not a caduceus but a tablet and stylus, recording the precise terms of Ishtar's release. Even their gender fluidity mirrors Hermes' later associations with androgyny, suggesting a shared archetype of the liminal operative who defies easy categorization. What truly cements Ninchuba's legacy are the diplomatic treaties bearing their seal. Excavations at Mari revealed covenants between warring city-states invoking Ninchuba alongside Shamash as witness, an extraordinary honor for a secondary deity. One tablet describes mediators swearing oaths by Ninchuba's unbroken word, their names synonymous with airtight agreements. Yet as Assyria rose, their roles shrank to Ishtar's attendant, their nuanced diplomacy flattened into subservience. The tragedy, Ninchuba's strategies outlived their fame. When a Hittite envoy negotiated peace with Ramses Roman II, his tactics playing reluctant, appealing to higher authorities, echoed Ninchuba's playbook down to the last clause. Somewhere in the dust of forgotten tablets lies the truth. The gods may have made history, but it was the viziers who wrote the fine print. Ningabloga roamed the celestial pastures in his brother's shadow, a divine herdsman tending the moon's silver cattle, while Sin, the radiant moon god himself, commanded worship in lavish temples. Where Sin's crescent crown gleamed over kings and scholars, Ningablaga's sickle moonstaff was a humble tool, used to count and guide the heavenly herds believed to graze the starry fields. His cult in Ur's outlying districts reflected this divide. While Sin's priests tracked eclipses and composed hymns, Ningablogga's followers left offerings of woven reed collars and clay udders, praying for healthy livestock below as he watched over their counterparts above. The contrast between the brothers reveals Mesopotamia's split view of the moon. Sin represented its awe-inspiring face, the luminary governing time, tides, and royal legitimacy. Ningablogga embodied its quieter magic. The gentle glow shepherds relied on for night watches, the celestial rhythms that dictated calving seasons. A broken tablet from Ur's archive captures this duality perfectly. Sin's epithet, Illuminator of Darkness, appears above Ningablogga's quieter title, the one who numbers the herds. Even their symbols diverged. Sin's crescent faced upward like a regal diadem, while Ningablogga's sickle curved downward, mimicking the motion of cutting fodder. His decline wasn't sudden, but a slow fading like moonlight at dawn. As astrology formalized under Babylonian scholars, the sky became a grid of omens rather than a pasture. Ningablogga's herds vanished from star charts, replaced by zodiacal constellations. A telling erasure appears in a late-period prayer where a scribe originally wrote Ningablogga's star cows, only to scrape the clay and substitute Sin's celestial path. Even his staff lost its pastoral meaning, reinterpreted as a mere phase of the moon in academic texts. Yet traces of the celestial herdsman linger. Modern Bedouin constellations still include Al-Bakar, the cattle, a cluster of stars ancient Sumerians associated with Ningablogga's charge. And on certain clear nights, if you squint at the moon's dark patches, you might just glimpse the shadowy shapes of cattle grazing the silvery plains, a fleeting memory of a god who cared more for cosmos than crowns. Listen cradled the dawn of creation in her womb long before mother goddesses became stock figures in Mesopotamian myth. Her origins stretch back to Adab's primordial days, where she was less a deity of gentle nurture than a cosmic architect of life itself. Unlike the more famous Ninhursag, Lisin's worship centered on a specific, staggering claim that the first humans weren't molded from clay, but birthed in her celestial womb, their cries echoing from the stars to the swamps of Sumer. The few surviving hymns call her the one who counted the bones of the unborn, a chilling glimpse into how deeply her devotees linked human gestation to the mathematics of the cosmos. Her temple in Adab, the Amar, posed one of Mesopotamia's great archaeological riddles. Excavations revealed a floor paved with hundreds of tiny clay uteruses, each one hollow, containing a pebble that priests would shake during childbirth invocations, mimicking the sound of amniotic fluid. But the true enigma lay overhead. Fragments of a ceiling fresco depicting the goddess superimposed over the Pleiades star cluster, her outstretched hands cradling 7 dots of lapis lazuli. Cuneiform tablets from the site describe midwives chanting to this stellar map during difficult deliveries, believing Lisin could pull the child down as she pulls down the stars. The epithet Lady of the Womb barely scratches the surface of her paradoxes. While other mother goddesses symbolized fertility, Lisin governed the terrifying margin between life and failure. Her rituals addressed stillbirths, monstrous births, and the mysteries of quickening. A haunting tablet from Sippar preserves a midwife's plea. Listen, if this child lives, I will string its placenta with stars. Her darker aspect emerges in a broken hymn warning that she could close the womb like a knotted cord, a threat reused in curses against enemy nations. What makes Lisin's fragmentation so tragic is how it mirrors the very body she governed. Like a disarticulated skeleton in an obstetric grave, her myths are scattered. A reference to Lisin's lament in a Mari tablet, a star chart from linking her to eclipses. Even her assimilation into Ninma's cult carried loss. Later texts stripped her celestial ties, reducing her to another generic birth helper. Yet in the ruins of Amar, archaeologists found a midwife's toolkit buried beneath the altar, a bronze hook wrapped in linen beside a clay tablet etched with just 3 words, "She remembers the stars." Ninkanana snipped his way through divine mythology with the precision of a master barber. his sacred razors gleaming as much from ritual polish as from their symbolic power to cleanse both hair and sin. While warrior gods brandished swords and fertility goddesses clutched sheaves of grain, Ninkanana's tools were a humble bronze blade, a bowl of rosewater, and a bristle brush, each one charged with purifying those who entered the presence of the gods. His temple workshops in and Lhasa weren't merely grooming parlors. They were liminal spaces where human met divine and where every clipped curl carried spiritual weight. Priests submitted to his rites before major ceremonies, their shaved scalps and brows signaling a shedding of worldly identity, while kings underwent his ministrations during coronations, their freshly trimmed beards proclaiming renewal and divine favor. The rituals surrounding Ninkanana reveal a surprising depth. Temple records describe a 3-day purification process where supplicants first washed in cedar-scented waters, then sat before a silver mirror held by acolytes not for vanity, but to confront their imperfections before Ninkanana's blade removed them. The cut hair wasn't discarded, it was woven into ceremonial ropes used to bind temple gateways, a tangible barrier against impurity. One particularly vivid tablet from details how a priest's unshorn eyebrow caused a failed divination, with the omens only clearing after Ninkanana's intervention. His role extended beyond the physical. A Babylonian hymn calls him the barber who shears away lies, suggesting his razor could metaphorically expose truth by stripping away deceptions, hairs. What truly sets Ninkanana apart are the playful myths where he tends to his fellow deities. A riotous fragment from Sipar recounts how Enki, the god of wisdom, demanded an elaborate braid for a banquet only for Ninkanana to accidentally lop it off when Enki dozed mid-cut. The punchline, the shorn hair transformed into the world's first river, reads, repurposing vanity into ecological gift. Another tablet depicts Ninkanana negotiating with Ishtar over her lion's unruly mane, resulting in a compromise. The beast kept its ferocity but gained a neatly trimmed fringe to avoid tangling in chariot wheels. These stories humanized the gods, showing them as patrons subject to the same mundane needs as mortals, just with more cosmic consequences. His tools held their own symbolism. The razor's curve mirrored the waxing moon, linking shaving rituals to lunar cycles. The lather bowl, often inscribed with the phrase, waters of clarity, doubled as a divination tool. Priests would interpret bubbles forming on its surface as omens. Even the apron he wore was no simple cloth. A surviving example from Lhasa's ruins is embroidered with constellations, positioning Ninkanana as a celestial groomer trimming the fringes of chaos itself. Yet Ninkanana's decline came with changing fashions. As Assyrian kings favored long, oiled beards as symbols of power, his once sacred blade became associated with servitude rather than sanctity. A heartbreaking tablet from Nineveh lists temple barbers reassigned to hair duty for foreign slaves, their divine patron reduced to a footnote in cosmetic manuals. But in a quiet corner of the British Museum, a single razor rests on velvet, its edge still sharp enough to catch the light after millennia, waiting for a hand that will never again wield it with sacred intent. Ninsutu's origins bite deep into Mesopotamian mythology literally. Born from a divine toothache, this healing goddess sprang from Enki's aching molar, a cosmic punchline with profound implications. While other deities claimed dominion over storms or kingship, Ninsutu's power pulsed in the most intimate of human agonies, the throbbing jaw, the abscessed gum, the relentless sting of dental decay. Her temples doubled as early dentists' offices, where sufferers would clutch tiny clay teeth inscribed with pleas like Ninsutu, extract pain like a worm from the apple, a vivid metaphor comparing toothache causing bacteria to fruit parasites. What made Ninsutu's worship so tactile were the rituals blending medicine and magic. Excavations at her shrines reveal bundles of herbs tied with linen thread, nestled beside figurines of gaping mouths. Cuneiform tablets detail a chillingly precise procedure. Priests would mix tamarisk bark and crushed juniper into a paste, press it against the affected tooth, then recite an incantation demanding the pain, flee like a thief caught in Enki's light. The real stroke of genius, using actual dental probes, bronze needles found in Nippur, to symbolically remove the demonic worms believed to cause cavities. One such tool, now in the Louvre, bears an inscription promising Ninsutu's finger guides this point. Her merger with Gyula, the broader healing goddess, reveals how specialization couldn't survive bureaucracy. As Mesopotamian medicine standardized, Ninsutu's niche focus on dentistry became a footnote in Gyula's comprehensive texts. A Babylonian medical tablet originally titled Ninsutu's Remedies for the Jaw was later repurposed as Gyula's Book of Aches, with all tooth-specific incantations moved to an appendix. Yet traces of her grit remain. When archaeologists uncovered a skeleton in Ur with a dental abscess packed with medicinal bitumen, they found a clay token nearby stamped with Ninsutu's emblem, a molar cradled in crescent moon, proof that some sufferers still whispered her name when the pain grew sharp. The irony, modern dentistry unknowingly echoes her. That worm metaphor resurfaced in medieval European toothache remedies, and the earliest dental drills mimicked the motion of her bronze probes. Even today, when a dentist leans in with a gleaming tool, they're channeling a 4,000-year-old belief that healing requires equal parts steel and story. Ninsakilla's gardens bloomed in the heart of Dilmun, not just a sanctuary of dates and figs, but a living manifesto of divine favor. As the personal goddess of Dilmun's queens, she wove sovereignty with fertility, her very presence turning arid soil into perfumed groves where pomegranates split open like rubies. While Sumer's gods thundered from ziggurats, Ninsakilla's power pooled in the quiet places, sacred springs bubbling up through limestone, irrigation channels humming with freshwater hymns. To rule Dilmun, a land mythologized as the pure place where sickness and old age held no sway, was to be Ninsakilla's earthly counterpart, her rituals ensuring that the kingdom's gardens never thirsted nor its people withered. The queen-goddess dynamic here was no mere metaphor. Cylinder seals from Bahrain's Kalat al-Bahrain show Ninsakilla handing a blossoming branch to a robed monarch, their faces mirrored like twin moons. Unlike the violent investiture scenes of Mesopotamian kingship, this was a gentler transfer of power, horticultural, almost maternal. Archaeologists found one such seal still pressed into clay near an ancient well, its inscription reading, "Ninsakilla gives the sweet waters, the queen gives the sweet laws." These artifacts suggest Dilmun's rulers didn't just worship the goddess, they channeled her, their authority rooted in the ability to make life flourish against the odds. Her connections to Eden-like myths run deeper than poetic coincidence. The Enki and Ninhursag epic describes Dilmun as a primordial paradise where the lion kills not, the wolf snatches no lamb, a phrasing that eerily anticipates Isaiah's peaceable kingdom. Ninsakilla's gardens, fed by artesian springs, may have inspired this imagery. A terracotta relief from Feloka Island depicts her enthroned beneath a palm tree, its fronds sheltering ibex and gazelles that drink calmly from her cupped hands. No thorns mar the scene, no serpents lurk in the branches, yet the most tantalizing clue lies in her epithet, Lady of the Rib, a title some scholars link to the biblical Eve's creation from Adam's rib. Could Ninsakilla's role as Dilmun's life-giver have seeded the Eden narrative as trade routes carried her myths westward? The silence around her cult speaks volumes. When Dilmun fell to Babylon's armies, Ninsakilla wasn't conquered so much as quietly erased. Her springs were rededicated to her gardens claimed by Ishtar's cult. Yet in the marshes of southern Iraq, elderly women still tie cloth strips to date palms and whisper for the lady who made things moist again, a folk memory of a goddess who turned even the driest earth into something holy. Nanbasagunu's presence clung to Nippur's fields like morning dew on barley stalks, a goddess whose very breath was said to ripen grain, yet whose name now crumbles at the edges of crumbling tablets. As the original grain mother of Sumer, she represented agriculture's primal feminine roots, her sheaf of barley scepter symbolizing not just abundance but the sacred labor of sowing and reaping. Long before Ninurta claimed credit for the plow or Enlil's thunderstorms blessed the harvest, Nanbarsagunu's hymns celebrated the blistered hands of women winnowing grain under the midsun, their work as vital as any god's decree. Her rituals unfolded with earthy intimacy. During the autumn equinox, Nippur's women would weave miniature barley sheaves from gold wire not for temple altars but for the thresholds of their own homes. These offerings weren't just symbolic. Cuneiform household records describe actual grain bundles hung beside doorways, their husks whispering prayers for winter sustenance. A particularly poignant tablet from a merchant's wife reads, "Nanbarsagunu, let your sheaves guard our hunger as a mother guards her sleeping child." The goddess's connection to domesticity ran deeper than state cults dared acknowledge. While male gods received public sacrifices, she thrived in the quiet moments. A handful of grain tossed into the hearth fire, a child's first porridge spoon left on a windowsill. Her eclipse came with the rise of centralized agriculture. As temple granaries swelled into economic powerhouses, male deities like Enlil and Ninurta absorbed her attributes, their priests reframing farming as a heroic conquest of nature rather than cyclical partnership. A telling revision appears in the Farmer's Almanac from Roman III, where early versions credit Nanbarsagunu with teaching crop rotation. Later copies replace her name with Ninurta's. Even her iconic sheaf was repurposed, becoming a generic symbol of kingship rather than maternal nourishment. Yet Nanbarsagunu's spirit couldn't be fully harvested. In rural households, women continued whispering her name while grinding flour, a tradition that persisted well into Babylonian times. Archaeologists excavating Nippur's residential quarters found clay plaques hidden under floorboards, crude etchings of a woman cradling grain, her face obscured but the sheaf unmistakable. And when modern farmers in southern Iraq still tie the last stalks of harvest into a mother bundle rather than threshing them, they're unknowingly keeping faith with a goddess who taught them that true abundance begins where the temple's spotlight doesn't shine. Ninsun's dream priestesses operated in the dim, incense-heavy chambers of Uruk's Agulma temple, where the boundary between waking and sleeping dissolved like honey in warm milk. These women weren't mere conduits for divine messages, they were skilled technocrats of the subconscious, blending ritual trance with meticulous documentation. Their methods began with immersion in sacred water, a practice hinted at by ceramic basins found near the temple's sleeping quarters, their interiors still stained with residues of lotus and poppy. After purification, priestesses would lie on woven reed mats, their heads resting on clay pillows incised with celestial maps, while acolytes chanted Ninsun's epithets in descending tones to guide them into liminal states. The surviving tablets from these sessions reveal a startlingly systematic approach. Each dream was recorded in triplicate, one version for the petitioner, one for the temple archives, and one written in cipher, buried beneath Ninsun's statue, believed to anchor the vision's power. One such tablet, now in the Louvre, details a merchant's nightmare about drowning in barley. The priestess's interpretation notes market fluctuations and a scribbled sketch of a sinking ship, later proven accurate when grain prices collapsed after a harbor siltation. Another fragment describes a royal concubine's dream of a flaming gazelle, interpreted as both a warning of miscarriage and a promise of future conception, annotated with symbols only these women understood. What set these priestesses apart was their embrace of collective dreaming. A broken cylinder seal depicts 3 interlocked female figures hovering over a sleeping supplicant, their stylized brain cavities connected by dotted lines. Corresponding texts mention the weaving of visions, suggesting priestesses could merge their trance states to amplify clarity. This collaborative aspect clashed violently with the rising male diviner caste, who favored liver divination's solitary binary readings. When Babylonian scholasticism demanded standardized omens, Ninsun's fluid, narrative-based interpretations were dismissed as women's chatter. The final blow came in the form of a legal decree from Hammurabi's reign, unearthed at Mari, which barred dream priestesses from certifying military or trade omens. Their once sacred tablets were repurposed as scribble practice material, the cipher tablets ground into pigment for royal inscriptions. Yet in a quiet rebellion, some priestesses smuggled their knowledge into midwifery, where dream interpretation survived as a diagnostic tool. A terracotta relief from late Yurok shows a birthing scene where the attendant holds a clay liver in one hand and a dream tablet in the other, a silent testament to the persistence of Ninsun's wisdom in the spaces men forgot to watch. Bao's sacred dogs weren't just symbolic, they were working healers, their rough tongues serving as the finest medical tools of their time. Excavations at her Lagash temple complex revealed stone troughs with shallow grooves, perfectly fitted for canine tongues to lap at infected wounds while priests chanted incantations. These weren't random strays. Skeletal remains showed temple dogs bred for specific traits: broad, flat tongues ideal for debriding flesh, and a peculiar genetic mutation causing excessive saliva production. One particularly well-preserved specimen, now displayed in Baghdad's National Museum, had its teeth filed smooth to prevent accidental nicks during treatment, its collar still bearing the cuneiform inscription, Licer of Bao, Purger of Rot. The depth of this human-canine partnership emerges in a remarkable tablet from Gersu. It details an 8-month training regimen where puppies were exposed to various wounds, some smeared with honey, others with rancid fat, teaching them to distinguish between healthy and necrotic tissue. Successful graduates received golden ear tags marking them as tongue of the goddess. Modern veterinarians who examined these descriptions note striking parallels to today's therapy dog programs, particularly for diabetic ulcer detection. But Bao's hounds held darker roles too. Beneath the temple's eastern courtyard, archaeologists uncovered a mass grave of 47 dogs arranged in concentric circles, their skeletons showing signs of ritual suffocation via sacred hemp ropes. Tablet fragments nearby describe an annual Night of the Silent Bark, when these chosen dogs were sacrificed to absorb the community's diseases. Their preserved stomach contents tell a haunting story, last meals laced with human blood and hair, literal embodiments of transference healing. The afterlife of Bao's cult lives on unexpectedly in modern science. Researchers at Johns Hopkins recently documented a bacterial enzyme in canine saliva, nicknamed Bao's Kiss, that accelerates wound healing by breaking down biofilms. And in rural Turkey, elderly women still press childhood scars to stray dogs' noses, whispering, "Bao remembers," an unbroken thread stretching back to when medicine walked on 4 legs and answered to a goddess. The fermentation vats of Ninkasi's temples weren't just clay pots, they were precision-engineered marvels. Their interiors grooved to trap sediment while allowing the liquid to circulate like a slow, bubbling whirlpool. Excavations at Lagash revealed conical vessels taller than a person, their bases embedded in packed earth to maintain a steady temperature, while straw-lined channels at the rim caught floating impurities like nature's own filtration system. Modern brewers recreating these designs were stunned by their efficiency. The straw acted as both filter and flavor enhancer, infusing the beer with grassy undertones that balanced the sweetness of date syrup. One experimental archaeologist described the setup as a Bronze Age microbrewery, where every element from the angle of the vat to the weave of the straw was calibrated through centuries of trial and error. The cuneiform manuals detail a brewing day with almost industrial rigor. Before dawn, priestesses would soak barley in shallow tanks, stirring it with forked sticks to encourage germination, a process now recognized as malting. By midday, the grain was spread across heated limestone slabs, the crackling heat locking in sugars, but the real artistry came during fermentation. Tablet fragments describe a dance of the bubbling vats, where priestesses used long cedar paddles to skim off foam at precise intervals, interpreting its texture and color like tea leaves. Too thick, the brew might sour; too thin, the alcohol content would falter. One particularly vivid instruction warns against brewing during the anger of a dad, referencing thunderstorms whose barometric pressure could disrupt fermentation, an observation modern science confirms. What truly astonishes is the scale. Ledgers from Ur's temple brewery list daily outputs exceeding 800 liters, enough to supply a small city. Workers toiled in shifts hauling barley in woven baskets, while scribes tracked every batch with notations like honeyed third fermentation, fit for the ends table. The beer wasn't just drunk, it was cooked into stew, used as antiseptic, even paid as wages. A worker's ration tablet from Gersu spells it out. 2 liters of Ninkasi's dark for wall building, 1 of her light for canal digging. The final proof of Mesopotamian brewing genius lies in the residue. Gas chromatography of temple vessel remnants detected traces of wild yeast strains still unique to the Tigris floodplains, along with unexpected additives: myrrh for preservation, pomegranate for tartness. When a Belgian brewing collective replicated the recipe using only period tools, the result was a tangy, effervescent ale scoring higher in blind tastings than half their modern craft lineup. Perhaps Ninkasi's greatest miracle wasn't turning water into beer, but designing a process so flawless that 4,000 years later we're still straining to catch up. Ishtar's scorpion venom wasn't just symbolism, it was the razor's edge between devotion and damnation, a literal poison dripping into the grooves of love spells and curse tablets alike. In the dim back rooms of her temples, priestesses kept clay jars of harvested venom, mixing it with honey for binding rituals or fermenting it with sour wine for punishments. A surviving spell tablet from Mari details a love incantation where a petitioner would trace their beloved's name in venom-laced dye, then whisper, "As this sting burns the clay, so burn your longing into their ribs." The same venom, diluted with milk, became a perverse medicine, applied to skin to cure infidelity by inducing feverish hallucinations of the betrayed partner. Modern toxicologists analyzing residue on these tablets identified a shocking precision. The diluted solutions contained just enough venom to cause pain without death, suggesting generations of trial and error to perfect the dosage. This duality, venom as both weapon and cure, echoes global poison deities like the Aztec Tlaltecutli, who transformed toxic plants into remedies, or the Hindu Nagas, serpentine beings whose venom could kill or confer immortality. But Ishtar's distinction was her contractual rigor. A curse tablet from Ugarit lists terms like a legal document. If he lies with another, let Ishtar's sting twist his bowels. If he keeps his oath, let her venom become syrup in his veins. The scorpion's tail became a divine pen, inscribing consequences into flesh. Her survival in folk medicine is a masterclass in cultural adaptation. Long after her temples fell, Mesopotamian midwives used dried scorpion venom ground with rose petals to ease labor pains, a practice recorded in Byzantine herbals as the old sting of Ishtar. Even today, Yazidi healers in northern Iraq bury ceramic scorpions under sikts to draw out pain, whispering phrases lifted verbatim from Ishtar's incantations. The venom's molecular structure may have changed over millennia, but the paradox remains. Sometimes the thing that hurts is the only thing that heals. Ningishidda's serpent staff didn't vanish with his cult. It slithered across continents, its coils twisting into one of history's most enduring symbols, the caduceus of Hermes. The journey begins in Lagash, where excavations uncovered cylinder seals depicting Ningishidda's rod, 2 serpents spiraling around a central axis, their mouths nearly touching, a design eerily mirrored in Greek artifacts centuries later. But how did a Mesopotamian underworld god's emblem end up in the hand of a messenger deity from another pantheon? The answer lies in the bustling trade networks of the late Bronze Age, where merchants carried more than spices and silver, they transported ideas. Astonishingly, the first hard evidence surfaces not in Greece but in Anatolia. A Hittite seal from Hattusa, dated to around 1400 BCE, shows a hybrid figure part Hermes, part Ningishida holding a staff identical to those from Lagash. Archaeologists hypothesize that Hurrian traders, acting as cultural intermediaries between Mesopotamia and the Aegean, adapted the symbol for their own storm god Teshub before it filtered west. The smoking gun, a shipwreck off Uluburan, yielded a cargo of Cypriot copper ingots stamped with both serpent staffs and early Greek markings, proving the symbol was in transit long before Homer sang of Hermes. The debate among scholars isn't about whether the symbol traveled, but what it meant along the way. For Ningishida, the serpents represented duality, life and death, healing and decay, a balance intrinsic to his role as psychopomp. Early Greek depictions, however, stripped away this nuance, initially using the caduceus as a simple herald's badge. Only later, during Greece's Orientalizing period, did the medical associations resurface, possibly through renewed contact with Near Eastern healers. A votive plaque from Corinth shows Hermes holding the staff over a sick child, flanked by inscriptions invoking the serpent's wisdom, a phrase lifted directly from Mesopotamian incantation texts. The implications ripple beyond art history. If Ningishida's staff inspired the caduceus, then modern medicine's most recognizable emblem isn't purely Greek. It's a Frankenstein's monster of cultural exchange, its DNA spliced from Sumerian underworld rites and Mycenaean trade deals. Yet the symbol's journey also highlights what gets lost in translation. The original staff's androgynous wielder, fluid as the serpents he commanded, became rigidly masculine in Greek hands. The Mesopotamian focus on cyclical renewal faded, replaced by Hermes' transactional speed. Even the serpents themselves changed. Ningishidas were equals, intertwined in perfect symmetry, while the caduceus often shows one serpent dominant, a subtle shift from balance to hierarchy. Perhaps the most poetic artifact sits in the Louvre, a Neo-Assyrian seal cheek by jowl with a classical Greek vase. On one, Ningishida's staff rests against a date palm, its roots drinking from the underworld. On the other, Hermes flourishes his caduceus beside an olive tree, the new world's answer to the old. The space between them, just 8 centuries and a sea of forgotten connections, proof that even when gods fade, their symbols keep slithering through time. The stories of these 30 forgotten deities paint a tapestry as rich and varied as Mesopotamia itself. Gods of toothaches and taverns, goddesses of barley and bureaucracy, each one a thread in the intricate weave of ancient belief. Their declines weren't random acts of oblivion, but reflections of seismic cultural shifts, the rise of empires that demanded simpler pantheons, the bureaucratization of religion that favored broad-stroke deities over niche specialists, the quiet erasure of local traditions under the weight of centralized power. When Ashur crumbled, so too did his god of conquest. When scribble schools standardized, Nineveh's reed pen was handed to Nabu. When medicine became a science, Bao's healing dogs were leashed by Gyula. These weren't mere theological evolutions, they were the fingerprints of history itself pressing into clay. Yet the question lingers, why do some gods endure while others fade? Ishtar's theatrics and Marduk's cosmic battles survived because they served the needs of kings and priests' grand narratives for grand ambitions. But the deities who governed life's quieter corners, the ones who presided over toothaches, beer froth, and the dreams of farmers, they thrived only as long as people could whisper their names in kitchens and fields, far from the chiseled proclamations of ziggurats. Their disappearance speaks to a deeper truth. Mythologies aren't erased by time alone, but by the slow silencing of everyday reverence. There's urgency in remembering these lost voices. When we revive Ninsakilla's gardens or Ninkarnana's sacred razors, we're not just cataloging curiosities, we're reclaiming the messy, beautiful diversity of human belief. Every overlooked deity holds a mirror to the fears and hopes of ordinary lives, the ones history books often skim past. So tell us which of these forgotten figures resonated with you. Was it the scorpion sting of Ishara, the star herding of Ningabloga, or perhaps the dream weaving of Ninsun? The conversation doesn't end here. Share your thoughts below, and let's keep these stories alive, because sometimes the most fascinating gods aren't the ones who shouted loudest, but those who whispered in the margins, waiting to